2 minutes and introduce ourselves. Ray, why don't you introduce yourself and just brief background?
Yeah, I'm Ray Canale. Will and I met about, I don't know, 25 or 30 years ago while I was down in Ann Arbor. I was a professor of environmental engineering down there. We worked together for, almost continuously on one project or another. The meeting here is officially, or the formal idea of this meeting was so people could learn how to use the database. And that's really relatively straightforward, at least for me, and I hope for you too. But before I get into that, I think the overall discussion of using the database, it requires a little bit of background on what we have here. And you should know that this database that we have is much more than a database. Typical database, like over here on the left, gives you a place to store and retrieve data conveniently and display selectively filtered data in a chart or table. By that, I mean, you might pick a year, you might pick a lake, you might pick a tributary, you might pick a parameter like phosphorus or secchi depth, etc. And that's all nice. It's pretty straightforward. There's many, many ways to do that. And with that information, you can put a trend line through it and make predictions based on extrapolation. This whole process requires no knowledge of lake ecological mechanisms, provides no insights into the causes that causes or ways to modify the trend. So if you see something going up, you get all alarmed. These data show you that there's something going on, but it doesn't give you any idea what to do about it or the best way to correct it. That's where the extra effort, frankly, it's about 80% of my effort is in including a linked mechanistic model to the data. In other words, data is coming in. What we have is a linked mechanistic model. So we can also store and retrieve data like the typical database. We can selectively filter, but now we can make projections based on model parameter values. And in order to do this, you need a deep understanding of the mechanisms that cause the change and as hopefully as much measurement, direct measurement in one way or another that you can have to support that understanding. And it can be used to quantify the effectiveness as alternative restoration techniques. So, and to elaborate just a little bit, here's some typical data for just I made up, and you can see that the red curve and the dots both fit the data really well. The trend analysis is an extrapolation. It just puts a line through there. You could put other kinds of curves, but they'd all amount to the same thing, and that being an extrapolation without any knowledge of mechanisms. What the red line does is what our model would do, would predict the phosphorus concentration in the future based on flow and loads and losses and oxygen, all these mechanisms that affect it. So when you do that, you get the projections change if you, for example, change land use or change runoff coefficients, or when septic tanks age or any other new loads are either removed or introduced. That is like 2 orders of magnitude way, way above just a simple database. Oh, by the way, this is not a formal presentation. So if there's questions, comments, arguments, disagreements, please pop right in because I'd appreciate that. I'm sure everyone else would as well. We're focusing on total phosphorus because it is the most important ecological parameter. It affects transparency, algal density and type, dissolved oxygen, and a whole bunch of other things. In addition, we have a standard that is unique, as far as I know, in the state of Michigan, specific standard. Forever, as far as I know, most of the standards are like best use or doesn't interfere with normal use, some sort of qualitative standard. We have a numerical standard, thanks to Will. And because of that, it is 8 micrograms 95% of the time. And so you can see if it's got to be 95% below 8, the average has to be actually somewhere around 6. So if it's around 6, 5% of the time, with some statistical analysis, et cetera, would push it up over the 8. And that's why we measure triplicate at one offshore site, multiple depths for several times per year. And that's been going on, I don't know, 35 years or so. And Nikki's our superstar that measures these concentrations. So the model requires quantification of the gains and the losses. And that is why we measure stream flow. We can't get the tributary loads going into the lake by just measuring the concentration. We have to know the flow. Is it a little trickle or is it, 500 CFS or something? So we need the flow and the concentration and the tribs. We need to know what the oxygen is, the sediment release, and fish loss and rainfall, storm events, hatchery loads. You need to know the geometry. You need to know something about septic tank loading and land use. All these things come into play in order to develop this model. And we also measure some other things just because they're sort of nice to measure, but they're not necessarily included in the model. We've got lots of data on algal species, zooplankton species, other chemical indicators. We measure transparency, conductivity, and oxidation reduction potential. These are in the database, these 3, and they have some use for us, but they're not directly involved in the model. So with that background, let me show you what we've been doing here. So I think this is what, can you see the spreadsheet now?
No, you need to stop share.
Stop share.
Okay, and then screen share again and then select the model.
Okay, boy, you're getting good at this, Will.
Oh, I'm a slow learner. It takes a couple hundred times.
But you're thorough and you're persistent. How about now?
Okay, looks good. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
This is the opening page of the Platte Lake and Tributary Monitoring Database. Some of you were online when Nicole Charetz, who does all of the phosphorus analysis, etc., at the Platte River Hatchery. The hatchery has a similar database to this one. We won't be getting into that today, but it processes all the hatchery data and we can plot. And it has the same characteristics and very similar capabilities to what we have here. Okay. So Ray, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay, so here's the main menu. And you can see up this yellow bar at the top, it says enable content. And that's because this thing is loaded with thousands of lines of computer code and that are executed when one of these buttons are clicked. And those are basically macros written with Microsoft VBA. And in order to get this thing to run, for example, if I hit this button, nothing happens. But if I enable the content, that basically says, hey, you trust this thing, we're going to be okay running macros, even though they can potentially be a big source of viruses and other problems. So if I click that, and let me just hide this. I think I can hide this. Now we're ready to go.
Yeah, one thing, Ray, let me just interrupt just for a second.
Oh, please.
Yeah, when I send this database out, I send a file out, okay? And you'll receive it attached to an email. Don't try and run that database from your email. you have to copy it and paste it to a hard drive or a USB chip or someplace else where you run that database other than your email server. Now, in the process of doing that, you'll have to right-click the properties on that file because Microsoft isn't going to let you run it. It's going to have a purplish red band similar to the yellow band, and it's going to say there's dangerous macros and whatnot, and they're being blocked. And what you have to do is select properties for that particular file. Once you've got it off of your email server, select that you want to enable those, okay, or disable those, what's blocking it, apply it, and then you can run the program.
So there's two levels of security, Will. One is if you just went through your procedure, which is kind of a Microsoft thing. And then the other one is enable the macros. So there's two steps you have to do. Once you get the thing loaded and running, you don't have to do that every time.
Yeah, and if anybody has any problem doing that, get back with me, give me a phone call, whatever it happens to be, and email, and I'll meet with you one-on-one and explain it to you.
I was going to try to do that, Will, but I couldn't get that, replicate
Well,
that first step.
once you unblock the macros, then, it goes away.
Okay. All right, well, this is the main page. And over on the left, it shows you all the places with labels where we're sampling. And notice we're not just sampling the lake, that's only one of 16 different places. So we measured all these tribs. And the reason for that is we're trying to figure out what's going on. In other words, if you were just looking at trends in the lake, you don't need all this information, really. I mean, so we'll talk about more of that, about that more as we go on. So the database parts, we have the lake chemistry and the lake probe data. These are measured different ways. One is chemistry in the lab. The other one is instrumentation which gets vertical profiles with either a YSI or HydroLab. What do you have now, Will? YSI?
Yeah, we're using the YSI, and let me explain something. I'm a retired measurement guy, testing guy from the Ford Motor Company, and one of the things we do before we take data is we calibrate whatever it is we're measuring that instrument against a standard, all right? Then we go about our business collecting the data, and then when we're done collecting the data, for example, in this case, the YSI probes, okay, we calibrate them, conductivity, we have ice baths and temperature, we have pH solutions, etc. Once we come back after being out in the field for 4 hours to collect that data, we do an as-found calibration where we then subject those sondes, that probe, to those particular calibration fluids, and we measure the drift. And if the drift is less than 1% acceptable, if the drift is off, then, hey, we got some bad data. So we do that on all the measurements we make. And along with that, we have an extensive quality control program on the phosphorus standards that Nikki uses. So the data that's in the database, to the best of our knowledge, is exactly what it is. It's not off by 50 or 80% or whatever,
Yeah, and I might add, Will, in my experience, dealing with many similar programs, no one else does that. And of course, no one else has Nikki. So anyway, we have the chemistry lake and probe data. We have the stream lake and probe data. And then I included some nearshore data. And that's all sort of observational stuff. The weather data, the lake, the flow and rain data, the correlation data, the analysis of that. That's all associated with developing the predictive model that I will go on to describe probably some other session. But then thanks to, I think it was Joe that came up with looking at a moving average analysis, we have that. And then we have a long-term trend analysis, we have that. So these data and these two analyses buttons here are essentially extrapolation things. Then mass balance gives you where all the pieces coming in and out on a given for a given year. And that we do as well. And I'll go into detail on that. And then the lake model is predictive model. As we collect all these data, it's going to update model parameters. So we have so as things change, our model predictions are going to change slightly as well. So that's kind of I've never seen that done before. So that was kind of proud of that effort actually. The annual average, the annual averages, support, and miscellaneous are all sort of background stuff that we'll get into. And then I forgot who came up with this idea, but on the far right is an update on the latest measurements. Somebody wanted to say, okay, well, we under new data for last week. I want to know right away whether that's in violation or outside the extremes of what we've been measurement. Is it a potential problem? And so what we have here is a list of various measurements. These are phosphorus, all phosphorus. Well, we know we've got temperature and oxygen. So here are our measurements. This is the last value. And then this is the last data was entered. And then I put in two bands that sort of like precautionary bands. If it's yellow, that means it's out of one standard deviation from the mean. And if it turns red, that means it's two standard deviations off the mean. So for example, we just measured phosphorus at 7. That's lower than the 9, that's lower than the 10, so it stays green. But if the yellow was a 5, let's say, then the 7 would be higher, but it wouldn't be 10, so it should turn yellow. And I update this thing. Now that 7 is a yellow. If I made them, and it's because it's between 5 and 10, if I made this 6 and updated, turns red. So this is just basically a lazy man's data of seeing exactly what's going on with the latest measurements.
And not only does that appear on the spreadsheet, but it also appears on the map, okay? So you see that happening there with, number 9.
Oh
The
yeah, I
other-
forgot I did that. How about that?
And the other thing is documentation.
Oh yeah, let me get to that. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Will. That's pretty neat, isn't it? This coloring in the spot that we're having a problem with. Okay, so documentation. You click this button, you get a pop-up panel with some directions on how to use this and a little bit of explanation. Tells a little bit about what I just went through. Tells you can't go screwing around in here and changing rows or inserting rows. The computer code, and we'll take a quick look at that in a minute. It anticipates certain things being in a certain location. And that's we could have built something that maybe wouldn't require that, but we've got so many other complications. It's, a compromise I made is we expect to see certain things in certain locations. If you don't do that, or you delete an equation, or you add a column or a row, it's probably going to screw things up. But there's always a backup copy that Will and John Ransom have. So if you do that, just close it down, don't save it. And well, all you have to do is just don't save what you've been screwing around with, and then you'll have the original version back.
Yeah, let me say something. One of the things that we found out early on in life, like 40 some years ago, is you don't want to be collecting your own data. You don't want to be analyzing your own data and then try and convince a judge, if you're the plaintiff or the defendant, that you didn't play with your own data. And henceforth, Platte Lake Improvement Association has always had somebody collecting the data, all right? In the beginning, it was the Department of Natural Resources, and then independent labs analyzed it. And then we had entered into a settlement agreement with extensive oversight. And now the DNR is analyzing the data for us with a whole bunch of quality control protocols. In addition to that, we don't collect the data. We have the Benzie Conservation District go out on the lake and collect data, and also collect field data with the Yellow Springs instrument, the YSI. And henceforth, there's a chain of custody there that we don't get involved with. And I tell people, everybody, well, we can analyze our own sample. No, you don't want to analyze your own samples, because if you're going to use them in any type of legal challenge, you don't want to be anywhere near that. That thousands of hours of court time would you just get embroiled in a black hole. Anyway, go ahead, Ray.
Hey, Ray,
Let me
before you,
just show you a
Ray,
little bit about that.
Question, there's a question here.
yeah,
Oh,
Ray,
yes.
this is Mike. Before you get going, could you comment on the source of the numbers in that chart there under update latest measurements, the source of the yellow and red numbers?
You know, I was just gonna do that, Mike.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Now, look up at the, up in the formula bar. You see how that's a 5? And that's a 6 up there. See that? Can you all see it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're sleeping. All right. If you look down here, Mike, you see a statement that says, look in the lake chemistry page and look for old cell 6003. And if you go there, and I could take you there if you want to follow up, but what that will be is the 6003 on that sheet is the average of all the data we've ever collected for phosphorus, plus 1 standard deviation.
Okay.
And over here, it says look in cell C6004. That's the average of all the data we've ever collected, plus 2 standard deviations. And furthermore, as we add phosphorus data, and as we add phosphorus data, more and more data, that average is updated along with these 2 numbers. So if I were to add a bunch of, whole bunch of 10s or 20s so you could see it, the average would go up, and these yellow and red bars would already, limits would change automatically.
Perfect.
So
So
Ray,
that's
if you were to hover over the 5 that you changed, that wouldn't relate to any of the data that we have stored, right?
correct.
Right, okay.
So at the end of this session, I'm not going to save this because I don't want that 5 and the 6 to be in there anymore. I want to go back to what it was originally.
Now, the other thing is, feel free to use, fool around with the database that you get sent. I am not sending you the original databases at all. I'm going through a file renaming process that's quite extensive, and you're getting something that if you clobber it or whatnot, you can re-download it and start from scratch. But it isn't something you want to use as feel that you're going to impact or change the data in any way. We've got quite a security profile going on the original information. Okay.
Now, an alternative to that, which we've been which would be a way to distribute this information, at least some of it, a simplified form, would be to do that on the internet. And At some point in time, if you're interested, I can show you what a terrific job a colleague did for Leelanau County, and give you an idea how much that would cost, et cetera. But and for our some of our folks here, one of the things that I'm working with John Ransom is to put a internet-based database for all the lakes in Leelanau County or Benzie County. So Upper and Lower Herring, Crystal, Platte, Little Platte, Ann, and Pearl, all those would have one location for all that data. We could look at trend analysis and have a place to store the data. So that may be of interest to some of you guys, the flow guys in particular might be interested in that, because now we're expanding it to not, this is a detailed thing for Platte Lake, and we've only got the first page and it's already 45 minutes. On a regional basis, that's what I'm working with John on, expanding this. So that's the first page. When you're done and you're sick of looking at the documentation, you can close it up, get rid of it. Most of the time, you probably won't even look at it. So let's go on to the first button here. And it's very similar in some ways. I tried to keep a nice, consistent design. First thing is over on the right is importing new data. And this is what you guys are not going to do. The only person who does this is John Ransom. He's taken measurements. It's his job to enter it into this database. He doesn't want to go searching around because these things have thousands of entries over here. He doesn't want to go searching around, finding the bottom of this thing, then adding the data. All he has to do is put it up in this little button, hit import, and it'll automatically append data to these long lists over here. So for example, the Secchi depth, if you look at, I just clicked on the Secchi depth over here, this 1214. If you look up in the bar, it gives you the count. So there's 1,214 measurements of Secchi depth, 556 measurements of chlorophyll, 694 measurements of total phosphorus weighted, volume weighted, and I'll get back to that in a minute. So that's the purpose of this thing. You know, unless you take a word for John, I'd stay away from that. Documentation, same thing as before. You open and close it, get an explanation. Every page has a main menu, which sends you back to the main menu. And then you have two charts. They're basically the same, except one allows you to put in a year of data you'd like to see. And the other spot here is a drop down, which allows you to pick phosphorus or nitrogen or chlorophyll or Secchi. So what you can do is, for example, this chart, notice this chart automatically updates with these choices. So the Y scale labels in feet, that gives you an average for the Secchi depth in 2023. And if I change this to, let's say, 2020, so all I have to do is put a 20 in there. And then since I've changed something, I have to update the chart. So there's the measurements in 2020. And you can see the pattern is different. By the way, it's kind of interesting. If you look at the, if you don't look at this beginning, just kind of look at this middle section, you get a increase in increase in Secchi depth, followed by a trough in the middle, and then another increase. This pattern is, you'll see this quite a bit. So well, that's for some other years, and we'll get into that later. So notice if I change this to phosphorus, the vertical scale changes over here, the label changes, the average changes, new information is displayed. And just for the heck of it, I could go over here, what I do all the time to make sure everything seems to be right. I'll make this exactly the same. And sure enough, it's exactly the same the way it should be. So you can play around with looking at various years. If you pick some year like, let me go over here and change this to 1940, 54. It'll give you, should give you a message, hey, the data are not available for 54 as entered in cell M3 or H3. So there's a few checks like this that allow you to, or at least try to prevent you from, I mean, if you put in 54 and a graph went blank, you wouldn't know what was going on. This way it gives you a little message, so you say, okay. Oh, and it even tells you, enter the data between 1990 and 2023. So when you put in a bad data point, it'll tell you it's not acceptable and it'll tell you what to do. How nice is that?
Ray, is
So
it
it's-
possible in this somewhere where you look at trends from year to year? Like if we wanted to look at total phosphorus from 1995 to 1999 or something?
Oh, we've got that totally nailed. Yeah, we've got that. Let me show you. Let me just go back and fix this thing. And let me answer your question. Who questioned it?
That was John Prokes.
Hey, John. Yeah, if we go back to the menu, main menu, there's two applications or two screens that are devoted to that task. One is a long-term trend analysis, and the other is a moving average analysis. So I was going to go through this, but since that came up, let's go with it. I click this, and there's a trend analysis for, and this on the left-hand side, this is 1990 to 1923, or to 2023. This is a volume-weighted summer temperature, and the bars are the maximum and minimum. The one on the right is 1990 to 2023, volume-weighted total phosphorus, 1 standard deviation. So I could play around with this if I wanted to. Let's say I only wanted to look at recent data. I could put in 2005. And instead of looking mini max, I could look at 1 standard deviation and hit update the chart. And now I have a different graph showing from 2005, 2023, along with 1 standard deviation. I wanted minimum max, there's minimum max. If I wanted 3 standard deviations, that's what I get. So I don't know what more you'd want, but I think that nails what your question.
Well,
And
the ability here is that when this is such a couple, 2 to 3 orders of magnitude above screwing around with an Excel spreadsheet and trying to make individual charts. I mean, this put us into the space age, I'll tell you. From the
you
Stone
need
Age.
so much patience to do that, what you said, Will.
Oh,
You know, by the time you're done with something like that, you spent all day at it.
exactly.
So notice the label and the label vertical Y bar axis changes automatically with our choice. This average and range shows up automatically. So if I change this back to volume weighted TP. Now the labels change, the y-axis changes, this thing changes. The round on the right is essentially the same thing. You can just pick choices, pick a parameter. You can open documentation, you want explanation.
And is all the data below, is that all the data that's going into those charts?
Yeah, this is what you're not, one of the things that I said up front in the documentation is anything that's in white you can play with. Anything that's just background gray or blue, whatever it is, you please stay away from it. That's what the background calculations and functions are doing to create these graphs. So what we're basically doing, for example, the evaluated TP over here on the lake chemistry, I'm extracting data from the lake chemistry, these columns right here, phosphorus, extracting that data using a bunch of VBA code to pick the right values, and then transferring that over to these locations here in the blue area to make the graph. In other words, the white establishes the filtering parameters. It looks in the proper sheet, whether it's probe data or stream data, whatever it is, extracts the data based on these choices, transfers over here in this blue area where you're not to touch it, and that drives the graphs.
Okay.
So just for fun, where is this? Okay, just for fun, and I won't bore you with this too often, but this is the code that it takes for each button has this.
Okay, I think I'll log out now.
So you can see, I mean, this frankly was the limits of my capabilities to remember what was going on. And frankly, I've talked to several other programmers. Once you get away from this thing, you work up your mind to a level that you can basically comprehend all this stuff. And a week later, despite your efforts to document the code, and I can go back and show you where it was documented, it still is a little bit of actually a significant chore to go back and change things. And the changes are difficult because everything is linked. So if I change some little thing somewhere, Will comes up with some new idea, I've got to review this thousands of lines of codes in every one of these buttons.
So the challenge going forward is how in God's name do we hang on to all this so that we can continue on? Because I think the objective, and correct me if I'm wrong, Liz, you jump in there, we'd like to propagate this to the rest of the watersheds. Now, obviously, you see data here that started out in 1991 and whatnot. We've got hundreds of thousands of data points, so we can really do these statistical, analysis, etc., with pretty good confidence because we've got tons and tons of data. But if we don't start collecting this same data in other watersheds, and after 5 or 10 years, you get a sizable amount of data that's significant, statistically significant. But the basis for the program, that Visual Basic Code, is understanding that, documenting it and whatnot, is really getting to be a limiting factor. I mean, we have to do that. We have to find a way to do that. We have to find people to do that.
Oh, that's Laura, right?
Well, it's Rudy Probst too, I hope.
Come on, okay, guys.
I mean, this is
I think Rudy could probably handle this. I'm just saying.
Yeah, Ray, when you pulled up the macros, it looks very familiar. I think, I can't say exactly, what all I can help out with, but I definitely know my way around code and can help you guys out with whatever it is, it's required to maintain this database you got here. It's a heck of a spreadsheet.
well,
Yeah, so what, one of the things I discovered, and if you're a programmer, I'm sure you've had this experience, you go back and look at something, what you did, and I just did this the other day, and I had about 100 lines of codes with loops and ifs and this and that. And I'm trying to figure out what it is. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, maybe I could do it a different way. And I figured out how to do it in about 10 steps that were a lot clearer. You know, so when you go back and look at this stuff, your first thoughts on how to do it are not necessarily the best. You had that experience already? Pardon
Definitely.
me?
It always helps to sleep on it.
Yeah, it always helps to sleep on it. And sometimes you look at some stuff you did and why would I do that? I have all this subscripted variables, loops on loops, when I could have done it so much simpler. And of course, I know probably, I don't know how much the whole world of Excel is in VBA. So I can't really estimate it because I don't know how big the total is. But I'm going to guess I know about 10% I mean, if you go online and watch guys doing stuff, you can see there are experts out that are far beyond what I'm doing. I've been able to do what I want to do, but I'm sure there's better
Well,
ways.
and the bigger question here is, and quite frankly, I'm 76 years old. Ray is how old now, Ray? 80
I
something?
don't want to say I'm
You don't want to
82.
say he's older than I am. How's that?
82.
82. Okay. What you're looking at is a long-term optimization of 45. I started working on this thing in 1974. Obviously, I didn't start working on this program, but getting all the data and everything else. And thousands of hours. And my whole point is we've trying to document it and archive it, not only this, but a whole bunch of other things. And, Scott Jones just worked a deal with Google, and they gave us 100 terabytes of free data and whatnot, so we can get a lot of stuff up there, and a lot of people can then get linked to it and download it and use it. But we can't let this evaporate. I mean, we can't let this just go to hell. There's just too much here that's too slick and too neat, and we got to build upon it. And the first thing you got to do is you got to have more than one or two people understand it, and that's the real critical. And I'll entertain any comments whatsoever from anybody. I hate to interrupt here because we got a lot to go on, but we knew we were going to limit this to an hour. And I'm at 7:58, although we did spend about 15 minutes, talking about old times. So maybe we can go for 15 more minutes if everybody agrees. And then we'll set a time and a date for the next meeting. But at this point in time, I'll entertain all comments. And if there aren't any, Ray, continue on.
Okay, getting back to the original question, I forgot who it was. Might have been Scott. And the question was, okay, you've got all these data. How do you do the trend analysis? And I mentioned earlier that we had two ways to do that. One was a moving average, and I think that was Joe that made that suggestion way back a couple of years ago. And then the long term, we went over the long term. Let's take a quick look at the moving average. Okay, here, these graphs are basically similar. I just put basically two of them up there so you could choose different things and see how they compare, etc. So what you can do is select the data for which you want to create essentially the standard or which you're going to be comparing against. So I call that the moving average start and the moving average end. And so I'm going to select the data from 2015 to 2023. I'm going to just show one standard deviation for the vertical bars. And I'm going to compare that with Carter for 2023. So the blue line is labeled up here, is the Carter data for 2015 to 2023 with the deviations, and then the red shows the 2023 actual measurements. So blue is kind of the trend you're looking to compare it with the red is your recent data. And so you can see that, we're, for the most part here, for a good part of the year in 2023, we're below the long-term trend analysis in the moving average. So that's kind of, and later on, we'll see that the lake concentrations this year were significantly lower than the normal trend. So this might be part of the reasons for that. So without that knowledge having we just looked at, we can change this. For example, let's take a look at USGS. Just click this.
For everybody's education, there's a edification rather, there's a USGS maintained gauging station at US 31 south of Honor where the Platte River goes across. That gauge has been installed as a result of the consent judgment, and originally we paid, you know, I think 25 or 30% of that, and then the DNR paid 5%, but now the DNR's picked up the whole funding for the USGS. But it's been there, and we measure concentrations, and this is the flow component. So go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, so again, you see the blue. I tried to keep a consistent design here. The blue, stay away from. You can play around with the choices in the white boxes, and there may be some stuff way over here that you're not supposed to look at, or certainly not. You can look at it, but you're not supposed to fool around with it because it's stuff that's internally calculated to support these graphs. So,
Ray, look at the difference between those two charts. Supposedly, the only difference is 2 standard deviations in the second chart, but it looks like there's some data that's not there in the right-hand chart.
well, now they're supposed to be the same. They look the
Looks
same.
like it looks like December's missing in the
Yeah.
second one with the two
Oh,
standard.
because it hasn't been measured yet or rendered. Duh.
Well, it's in the right-hand
It's
graph.
in the left-hand chart, but not the right-hand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
December data.
all right.
Actually, Ray, there's 2 data points missing.
2 data points that aren't there.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. See, this is the kind of thing. Now, this is the kind of thing that should have been going on 2 years ago when all this stuff was fresh. Now, for me to fix that, that's my responsibility because it's an obvious error. I can see 2 points missing. So I'm going to,
Well, could that be explained, Will, because the YSI instrument was
No.
being repaired? We didn't get measurements during those months?
no, because it should be exactly
Yeah,
the
if you
same
got it on
both.
the left chart, it should be on the right chart because they're exactly
Correct.
the same.
Yep.
Correct.
Wonderful.
So that's the first error we've come up with. I hope we can
And-
find more because there probably are.
You
And
can do this.
again-
Let me just explain too why this is so helpful for me anyway. I would get the data, the monthly data, and I'd see a data point that looked rather high. And we know that a lot of these data are vary by flow, by season, by time of the year. And I would just scratch my head and say, well, is that data point something we should be worried about? Or is it something that is kind of in the range? Is it something we should react to, or something that we can just, well, Ray put this chart together and we can look at every data point and whether or not it's within 1 standard deviation of the average, 2 standard deviations of the average, or 3 standard deviations of the average. And it tells you right away that high data point that I might have been concerned with is within range of previous data that we've collected and nothing that we should be that concerned about. Or we could find out that it isn't, that it's outside of that range and is something that we should be worried about.
Well,
Yeah, a perfect example is the 4th point here. That's above 1 standard deviation. I can go up here and make this a 2. And it gets closer. And a 3 if it's working.
gotta update the chart, Ray.
Oh, yeah. Good idea.
there you go.
So coming from a manufacturing background, I mean, this is like control chart in your operation. It lets
Just
you
got
know
your-
whether or not
You
you're
just
in
got your
control
data
or not in
points back,
control.
Ray.
I was gonna say the December data point just popped in when you hit update, so maybe there was
Oh,
no
yeah,
bug.
there you go.
Maybe it was a refresh thing.
Oh, see, there's no error at all.
You knew that.
What
You just,
happened?
Ray, I think you're just
happened-
testing us to see if we're paying attention here. That's
That's that
what's
old
really
professor.
happening.
Okay, boys and
I know.
girls,
Not so
okay,
fast because, go
It's-
back and make it 3 because, or 2,
It's-
because it was on 2. Do it now and see
Okay.
what it did.
That shouldn't matter, but we'll see.
Couldn't, no, that's when we saw it before on 2. There you go, it's there.
there it is.
Covered is all the data inputs and the trend analysis tools. So that's a really nice stopping point where we can pick up to go into some of these other things, particularly the model. So let me stop share.
Okay.
And now what do you want to do?
Well, what I'd like to do is get kind of a voice feed on when history. Initially, we started this thing in, the consent judgment in 88. We started collecting some data in 89. We didn't, the consent judgment, no, it was the actual conviction. And we didn't enter the consent judgment until 2000. And under the auspices of a court master, and then I started putting the data in an Excel spreadsheet for about 13 years. And then we then spent another 13 years or so trying to put it in and did put it into a access database.
Prior to that was, don't forget the DNR's attempt.
And the DNR attempted, they spent 2 or 3 years on this, and then they failed, threw up their hands, and they couldn't do it. And then Jim Barrage picked it up, and he put it in an access database, but that was also very complex and clumsy and didn't allow it worked. We could plot some graphs and stuff like that, but nowhere near like I said, this is a couple orders of magnitude in terms of capability and data analysis ease other than that. And then we actually started this one about 2015, Ray, somewhere
This
around.
one, yeah,
And then
Yeah.
There was various versions of this, and we even had a limited amount of data in one program, and then we had another program that we called watershed mass balance that was had some predictive capability in it. We could actually enter in point source loads and look at the impact on the 8 microgram per liter standard for varying years with different weather conditions and rainfall amounts and so forth. And then finally, about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago now, this finally matured into where Ray has got it to this point in time, and doing similar things, of course, at similar points in time with the hatchery database. So yeah, this is a long-term, what you're looking at is a long-term optimization of how you store all this data and then how do you get at it. And once we get everybody up to speed, the next big trick is who's doing what to who in the watershed, so we can relate the changes we're measuring with the data to what's actually going on in terms of reality with land use. And that's might even be a bigger issue than the database itself. So, but yeah, that's where we're headed.